All right. So, Angela, please, can you confirm that you can hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Once again, we apologize for that little itch there. You're welcome. Good afternoon again to the Real Estate Today that is organized by Ubosi Ele and Co. My name is Oluson Jofawale, and I will be moderating this session today. Today, we'll be tackling one of the most pressing conversation in Nigeria real estate landscape, the rent crisis. We'll be exploring why housing costs continue to rise, who is most affected, and crucially, what is the sustainable path forward look like. Now, before we begin, I just need to do a little bit of housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with registered attendees if you so desire. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions throughout the session if you have any question. And you can be certain that we're going to address your question as soon as you drop those questions. The chat box is also open, and you can feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you are actually listening or calling from. Also, be aware that you may have the privilege and opportunity to be called to ask live questions if you so desire. And at this point, at that time, you'll be asked to raise your hand, and then we're going to call you in and allow you to ask your question directly. So right now, I think it's time about now to go into the topic. But before that, we have a distinguished expert with us today, and I'd like to bring in momentarily. But before that, let me just take a brief moment to just introduce him, not too much of introduction. Our speaker today needs no too much of introduction because, of course, I'll then do him the honor notwithstanding. Mr. Chudi Ubosi is the principal partner of Ubosi Ele and Company, one of Nigeria's most reputable estate surveying and valuation firm. And as a matter of fact, the firm is celebrating its 35 years industry of excellence. And over the course of his career, Mr. Ubosi has advised on landmark property transactions, valuation, policy matters, and have shaped the built environment across Nigeria and West Africa. He has been a consistent voice on issue of housing affordability, urban planning, and real estate investment. And there is perhaps no other better person placed to help us understand today's rent crisis and what needs to change. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to welcome with me Mr. Chudi Ubosi, the principal partner of Ubosi Ele and Company. Sir, the floor is yours. You're welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar. Again, it's a pleasure to host you as we talk about issues concerning the rent crisis in Nigeria, understanding Nigeria's housing crisis and the way forward. It's something that affects every one of us. And you know how it is said that housing is one of the key needs of man. So, as it were, every one of us has a house or accommodation that we live in. And so when these things become unavailable or nearly out of reach, it creates very serious cause for concern. In the last 12 months, and I'll go straight to my presentation, in the last 12 to 14 months, rental values have jumped. Maybe we use the word surge. In the major cities, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Enugu, Benin, Ibadan, and so on, rents have jumped. And when we use the word surge, maybe surge is a mild word. I think there should be a mild word, not we. Tenants have faced rental increases from 50% to as much as 200% of over and above what they were originally paying. And in most cases, the landlords issue quick notices because they want to exit the current tenant, maybe because he's been there for a long time and enjoys the possibility of a sitting tenant advantage and so on. So they know that they cannot achieve an increase that is outrageous, 10%, 20% allowable, but when you're going to 50, 100%. So when a landlord knows that he can't achieve that with you or with the tenant, the easiest thing to do is to give a quick notice. And, to put this in perspective, we live in a country where 25%, less than 25% of the population of Nigeria own their own homes. And I'd say that again, less than 25% of Nigerians own their own homes, compared to countries elsewhere all over the world. In Europe, where you have about 70% ownership, 80% ownership. In parts of Africa, like South Africa, you have about 60% ownership, and so on. In places like Egypt, you probably have about 60, 70% ownership of homes. But in Nigeria, we have a 25% ownership. The population of Nigerians that own their own homes is less than 25%. And then that puts in perspective for us the serious disruption that comes when we have accommodation and rental increases getting out of the reach of a large number of Nigerians. As I go on, I want to just give you I want to focus on a few data on housing about Nigeria. First of all, Nigeria has a population of 230 million. Again, it depends on who you are talking to. These are figures that are thrown about. Sometimes we hear it's 180, sometimes we hear it's 200, sometimes we hear it's 230. But one thing is certain, our population is definitely hitting the 200 million mark. And we have, every year, the population increases by about 4 to 5% every year. There's an increase in the population of about 4 to 5%. We have a population under 18 of about 55%. 55% of our 200 million. This is according to the World Bank data of 2024. 55% of our 200 million population is under 18. Juxtapose that to the number of residential houses in Nigeria. I think the last census, the last enumeration that was done, we have 42 million homes or houses all over the nation. Even with that number, it is said that about 40% of that number is inadequate housing. By the UN standards, when a housing is said to be inadequate, it doesn't have the toilet facilities, proper ventilation, and things that a regular accommodation should be able to offer the average person. So about 40% of our 42% of our 42 million houses in Nigeria today are inadequate, even for the population that stay there. And so that's why next line there tells us that about 50% of Nigerians are living in crowded settlements. About 50% of Nigerians, based on the data available, World Bank and the NBS, 50% of Nigerians are living in crowded settlements, which means that these are, we cannot generally say that these people are well accommodated. And to round this up, we have a housing deficit, about 28 million. Again, this is the Federal Mortgage Bank, Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development estimate, the Central Bank of Nigeria estimate. The UN also estimates that maybe our housing deficit is anything between 20 to 28 million. And a few weeks ago, I was in a program where we were talking about this crisis. And somebody said, if we think we have a crisis of population now, and the rental and the accommodation issues now, that we should give ourselves another 20 years. We have a population of people, maybe about 55%, maybe about 100 million people who are under 18. Maybe 50 million of those people will eventually get married, will pair up themselves and get married. And of that number of that number, of those 50 million couples, they will all have 2 to 4 children. Let us assume that on the average, they have 2 children. It means that in another 10 to 15 years, we may, if care is not taken, be adding an additional 100 persons to our population. So with this kind of data, with this kind of figures, you can begin to see and understand why we say that there's a housing crisis, and the housing crisis is leading to a rent crisis. And then I'll round it up again before I go on to the next paragraph. Every year, our universities produce over 700,000 graduates every year. The universities, the polytechnics, the colleges of education produce about 700,000 graduates. Now, most of these graduates, give them a 4 to 5 year time frame. They'll be out on the streets, looking for their own homes, looking to start families. These are all the reasons. So it means that every year, if we're not even producing on the average 700 or so units of accommodation for the population that is just coming out of the colleges, the universities, and the polytechnics, we are still going, the crisis can only begin to get worse. So I'm going to the next, I'll just talk slide. All right, I'll talk slightly on the effects of the rising rents. And the first one is that a lot of big notices have been issued by landlords who want to capitalize or maximize their assets. And you can't blame anybody. These are assets that they have, these are investments that have been made, and the landlords want to, as much as possible, work these investments, work these assets so that they can generate maximum profit from them. So when it comes to even things like rent, where we think that people should have some kind of empathy, you must also remember that these are investments like every other investment. And right now, because of the rising rents, landlords are beginning to issue a lot of quick notices to their tenants. And as people receive those quick notices, people are finding that, look, they cannot get a similar accommodation in the neighborhood, in the location where they were. So they can't get a similar accommodation in the same location without paying much higher rent. And again, remember that our income in Nigeria has remained more or less the same, even where there are slight increases here and there. Inflation has in a funny way, stabilized a lot of the income that we make. So tenants are moving to the outskirts. They're moving to less expensive neighborhoods. Sometimes and many times, these less expensive neighborhoods, these new locations are far from their places of work. And one of the effects of those things is that productivity will fall. If the average Nigerian has to spend 2 hours to get to the office and 2 hours or 3 hours to get home, it's only logical that productivity will fall. In fact, one of the major things in Nigeria is that today we still haven't got the matrix, the correct matrix for measuring productivity, or how much of it we're losing or how much of it we're gaining. Because if we were, a lot of things that we go through, sitting down in traffic, sitting down in the buses, transportation, commute time, will indeed show that a lot is being lost in productivity and in hours that should be used for productive things. Tenants are moving into smaller units. That just follows. If you can't afford a 3-bedroom flat, you may be able to then pay for a 2-bedroom flat. Interestingly, about 2-3 weeks ago, Business Day newspaper published a story that lecturers in Unilag, many lecturers in Unilag were sleeping in the classrooms because they could not afford accommodation. I think that was on the 12th of March. this year, about 2-3 weeks ago. They could not afford to pay rents wherever it is that they were staying. So after lectures, many were now sleeping in the classrooms. That is how bad the situation has become. Another effect of the rising rent is that there are a lot more default in payments. Court cases are rising. Landlords and tenants are engaging themselves more and more frequently in the law courts. Crisis, it's now basically like a crisis situation, and everybody is throwing the blame around. It's the government's fault. It's the landlord's fault. It's the fault of the estate agents. And excuse me, is the fault of the estate agents. And in Delta State, for example, I think in Delta State and Cross River, they felt so much that the rising rents were a result of the estate agents who were hiking up rents because they wanted to make more fees. The feeling that the belief that because the fees were pegged to the rents that were collected, that many estate agents were encouraging landlords to increase their rents. And one of the states, I think it was in Delta, decided to peg the fees in Delta State, maybe a flat fee. If you let a property, whatever the rent was, your fee would be X naira. It didn't matter that it was a 10 naira property or a 100 million property, your fee would simply be X naira. It wasn't going to be based on percentages. Another state has actually toyed with the idea of outlawing estate agents and declaring them person non grata in the state. But the bottom line is that these are all knee-jerk reactions and very feeble attempts and reactions to the challenge of rising rent. And in the next paragraph, I'm going to take you through why these rents have risen to what they are. We're going to talk about the path to the high rents and the crisis they're in. The first thing that I'll talk about is inflation. The present administration in 2023 started off with several policy changes that impacted the economic trajectory of the nation. Fuel moved from 200 naira a litre to 600 naira a litre, and eventually to 1,000 naira, and then it began to come down. But again, we all know what's happening today. This morning, the 26th of March 2026, fuel is selling for about 1,340 to 1,350 naira in Lagos. And that's, again, primarily because of the fact that fuel is based on the international price of oil. The international price of oil is determined by a lot of factors. Today, we have the Iran and US war going on that has impacted fuel, oil deliveries and oil prices. And it's being felt all over the world. In the US, people are paying as much as $6 a gallon for fuel. $6 a gallon is about 8,500, 9,000 naira for 4 liters of fuel. It takes it to about 1,500, 1,600, to about 2,000 naira per liter of fuel, from something that was as little as $1.50 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. FX rates have moved from 600 naira a dollar to nearly 1,000. Or FX rates moved when the administration came in from 600 naira a dollar to 1,800, and have begun to fiddle or funnel downwards. Today is about 1,400, 1,380 naira to a dollar. Now, for a country that imports nearly all it needs, these increases were bound to come back to haunt us. And because things like the exchange rate impacted very greatly on fuel pricing. Fuel drives transportation, distribution of goods, food prices, even human activity. Fuel drives all these things, and all the prices went up. It came with very serious inflation, which as at today, the government is beginning to manage. But as at today, inflation stands at about 15.6%. In the next slide, I will show you very quickly how rents have moved. If you look at a place like Ikoyi, for an average 4-bedroom detached house, and in 2021, it was 15 million per annum. 5 years later or 4 years later, 2025, it was 70 million per annum. In Port Harcourt, GRA, 5.5 million per annum. 5 years later, 12 million per annum. In Abuja, my time, it was 12 million per annum. As of 2025, it was 50 million per annum. Rents have really, really, really moved up. And this is all because the inflation that came about because of the government policies made it clear that the cost of building materials were high, labor, cement, and a lot of other things, which even were produced locally, but have foreign components, also went high. The long-term effect of all this, the high cost of building materials, is that it's become more expensive to deliver a completed property. It's become more expensive. Whichever way you look at it, labor is up, the building materials is up, the components, the finishing materials, everything has increased. It has become more expensive to deliver a completed property. Landlords must or have to increase their rents to make their investments sensible. So these are some of the reasons, another reason why we are on the path to high rents. The next slide, you will again see the cost of building materials, sharp sand, a bag of cement in 2021, 3,300. In 2025, between 10,000 and 12,000 naira for a bag of cement. A tip of sand, 30 tons. In 2021, 30,000 naira. In 2025, almost 200,000 naira. It's gone up sixfold. Even the cost of artisans, labor, daily work, daily paid artisans in 2021, 2,500. Today, 10,000. Mason, 4,000 to 5,000 naira per day in 2021. In 2025, it's about 15 to 20,000 naira per day. So all these have aided the cost of production of the average house and have helped increase the cost of the houses, the cost of building them, and have led to landlords increasing their rents or even the sale value of these properties to be able to recoup their investment. The third reason that is taking us to this high rents is the urbanization. Many cities in Nigeria continue to bear the brunt of the rural-urban migration in Nigeria. We will not deny the fact that the way Nigeria is structured, only or primarily the state capitals is where people really, really enjoy economic opportunities. So people are constantly leaving the rural areas to move into the urban areas in search of greener pastures, in search of better quality living, in search of a better life. Everyone deserves a better life and owes themselves that responsibility. And the only way they will do it is to move from the rural areas where they don't have those opportunities and move to the urban areas. And as this movement takes place, it continues to put pressure on the available housing stock in the urban areas. Lagos, for example, the data for Lagos says that about 2,000 people move into Lagos every day. 2,000 people move into Lagos every day. A net inflow. It means that the number of people who leave, the difference in the number of people who leave Lagos and those who come in to stay every day is 2,000 people. That is a huge number because we're talking nearly an increase of 700 to 800,000 people in Lagos every year. And they come in not just from Nigeria, Lagos being what it is. People coming from even as far as the West African sub-region. People are constantly coming in here to look for economic opportunities. And then when you get into the urban areas, where the infrastructure and for services, again, that's one of the things that there is this rural-urban migration. Infrastructure, services, the things that make life easy, electricity, schools for their children, security, facilities, even just to make life easy, all exist in the urban areas. And so again, there's better infrastructure, there are better roads, there's drainage, there's electricity, and so people move. And as this continues to happen, there is that continued pressure on the housing in the urban areas and the big cities in Nigeria. The fifth reason we're talking about this morning is about this afternoon, sorry, it's about the greed and speculation. And I'll just read what I wrote here. I said a bit of the rental prices is driven by greed and speculation, bidding and outbidding of prospective tenants, as well as exaggerated stories of what is obtainable in the market. And I'll take that from a practitioner's perspective. There are a lot of landlords who generally, whether you like it or not, are driven by greed. They want to get even much higher than their properties can attract in the market. Then there are those who are speculating about rentals. You come in, you make them an offer, and he uses your offer to negotiate with the next tenant who comes in. That one goes a little higher. And he uses that second offer from the tenant to negotiate again with a third tenant. And he keeps pushing these tenants until he thinks he has reached his limit or he thinks he's achieved the best for his property. And he finally settles for it. But what then happens is that new rent then becomes the landmark for the next property that will come into the market. Because the industry is small. That information gets round. And so number 10, Lagbaja Street was let for 40,000 naira. Everybody knows. When number 15 or number 20 Lagbaja Street is available, 40,000 naira then becomes the benchmark. It doesn't matter whether it is 1 month or 3 months from that time. It becomes the benchmark. And then it's the basis for driving the higher rent. And then, of course, there are always the exaggerated stories of what is obtainable in the market. But the truth about it is that all this add up, this greed, the speculation, the bidding and outbidding by tenants, and all the exaggerated stories about what is obtainable in the market. The truth about it is that these all add up. They come together and add up and help to drive up rents in those cities in Lagos. We'll talk about increasing land values. I put data there for you to see. You can compare what it was in 2021 and what it is today or in 2025. Land values are moving up. And if people have to acquire this property, if people have to acquire land to do their development, then they would have to charge much higher rents to be able to amortize their investments, or even ensure that those investments are sensible by any chance. The other part that leads to rental income, the high rent, is limited access to development finance. In Nigeria, there is a limited access to development finance. And this comes along the entire spectrum of the entire chain of the housing spectrum, from the man who sells building materials to the builder to the end user. There's very little finance available. Many people cannot secure the funding that is needed for this thing as a result of low income, lack of the credit history. And then the difficulty in meeting the very tough conditions put forward by a lot of the financial institutions before they can render the needed assistance in terms of facilities, either to buy materials, in terms of credit facilities, either to develop, or even in terms of the mortgages that are needed to buy these properties and so on. And this is what happens is that we have a situation where interest rates are as high as 28% and can go even much higher to as much as 40% per annum. And with this kind of rates, it will become suicidal to put it in real estate, which is slow and the returns are even long-term, not short-term. So again, this is one of the things that leads to high rents, because people do these developments, they're doing it from their personal funds. They're doing it from funds that are raised by friends. They're doing it from things that do not give them long-term. It has to be short-term. And the only way to be able to do it and get out quickly is to, again, come in and charge very high rents. Excuse me. Well, I want to talk about the role of high government charges in the problem that we have today, which is a housing crisis and the high rents that we're beginning to see. If you have ever built or have had reason to encounter the government and its agencies in development, you will know that a lot of times development is not for the faint-hearted. From the cost of building approvals, to the cost to levies, to development charges, to consent fee for you to perfect your title, to the various agencies that are supposed to come and supervise your site. In Lagos, there's a Lagos Materials Testing Department, and so on and so forth. There are all kinds of charges that come with doing development, what come with building a property. And then there will be the constant visits and harassment by government officials. Money is spent here and there. All these things add up. They all add up, whether we like it, whether we accept it or not. They all add up to the cost, to increasing the cost of delivery of a house, of most of the properties that we see. And at the end of the day, these high costs will be thrown or will be taken to the property, or who eventually buys it. Somebody has to bear those costs. And these are some of the reasons that you end up having high rents and so on. At the end of the day, these government charges, consent fees, buying approval and so on, somebody has to bear the cost. It is the end user. The end user is the man who is paying the rent or who is buying the property at the end of the day. I'm going to round up with, in terms of why the route that we have, that has the path that has taken us to this high rentals. I'm going to round up with something that many of us may not have thought of. And I've titled it The Failure of Our Institutions. And I think it's one of the areas where many have forgotten the effect of the weaknesses of our institutions in Nigeria. Today, tenants will pay you 1 year's rent or maybe a few months' rent, move into your property, and then engage you in court for another 5 years. And before that court case is decided or judgment is given, simply just pack up and escape. So you have a situation where the landlord has collected 1 year's rent or 6 months' rent and has spent 5 years trying to get the remaining rent for his property. He engages a lawyer, is going in and out of the courts. Eventually, the tenant, even before the judgment is given, the tenant runs away. And in running away, he destroys a lot more of the property property. So even the rent that was initially collected, the landlord has to now go back and put it in the property to bring it up to standard for a new tenant to come in. Now, let me explain how this is beginning to tell on the rental crisis. There are fewer and fewer landlords who are building houses to let out. There are fewer and fewer landlords who are investing their money in doing property development solely for the purpose of rental income as a return on their investment. Because many people no longer have any faith in the system and believe that the system can protect them when the tenant begins to misbehave and not pay rent. So we're seeing a situation now where landlords are saying, look, let me put my money in some money market investment. Let me put my money in a fixed deposit investment. Let me put my money in stocks and shares. I don't have to deal with tenants. And this is something that, for those of us who are in the industry, it's becoming more and more common. You have a situation, landlord finishes a court case, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. He's afraid. He's not afraid to put a new tenant into the property. And he says to us, please, maybe what we should be looking at is selling this property. Let me take my money, put it in some fixed deposit investment, 10%, 12% per annum. I will get so much more than my rent, and it's stress-free. These are, whether we like it or not, are beginning the effects, long-term effects of the failure of the institutions around us here in Nigeria. As I begin to round up, I want to talk very briefly on what I think is the way forward. What I think is the way forward. The first thing that I want to say is that housing is inelastic. There is no approach. Housing, delivery, development, production is inelastic. So it's not as if recommended impact and reduce rent to, yes, if we relatively, yes, tomorrow the rent will win. We'll be talking about this to be made. And it needs to be implemented. The effects of the elections will begin, the effect of these recommendations will begin to be felt in 2 years, 3 years, and clearly if they are implemented within 5 Julys and actually begin, what I would like to say is the review of the Land Use Act. I know that is already one way or the other in progress. It's something that we have constantly harped upon at corporate level, at every forum. The review of the Land Use Act, it's important that access to land is made more and more easier. Reduce the cost of land transactions, the cost of plan approvals, the cost of consent, reduce the cost of reduce the cost of land transactions, give people easier access to land, of obtaining title. In some past fora, we've talked about the issue of debt capital. And this is something that we have taken as we're very passionate about even in our practice. And it's something that we rehash whenever we have the opportunity. the issue of dead capital. Hernando de Sa, in his book, The Mystery of Having Access to Land. But the difference between what you can do with that land and how that land can be useful to you or just sitting there. The government should ensure more public capital so that we can bring a law land in Nigeria into Nigeria is sitting on 927,000. The land area of Nigeria is 922,000 square kilometers. Less than 10% of that titled. Imagine if we can title 50% of the land area in Nigeria and bring up 50,000 square kilometers of land, where people can pledge their land for projects and for development and for housing and for joint ventures and so on. There is so much more to do. And it means that there will be a lot more development. There will be more residential development. There will be more businesses. There will be more projects. There will even be a lot more infrastructural facilities and services. And the more of these things that we have, the more that the more the chances, not just the chances, the more certainly that there will be a lot more properties coming into the market and rents will begin to go down. The housing crisis that we are in the middle of now will begin to reduce or will disappear completely. The next time we're going to talk about it, increase the provision of infrastructure services. You know, why these rents? Why we have this high rents is that everybody wants to be in the center, urban migration. And to the rural urban, the urban away from your office, you want to do and so forth. But with better roads, real water transportation, will find that inside Lagos, people can stay in their hometowns, people can live in Ibadan and come to work to live in Lagos. The reason why we have want to stay in the urban area, and you want to stay here because you don't want to stay too far from your economic opportunity or your economic activity. But if there was adequate transportation, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, adequate, certain people would be glad to stay outside the needs to use the public-private sector participation model a lot more to government trying to do everything, build roads. A lot of these things can be found out. So people are building rail lines to Ibadan, to Benin, and so on, and charging for them. And this all makes it easier in terms of communication for everyone who is involved. And once we begin to on the center, once the pressure on the center begins to diffuse or is dispersed, it is guaranteed that rents will fall. Finally, there's so much more can talk about in terms of the way forward, but I'm just government to provide so that
Hello, sir. We can't hear you again. Okay.
today,
Yes.
savings is less than 5%. 95 are banks today in Africa. Call money, even though I have a bank account, I have saved money in my bank account by simply writing a check. It's off. I can save that. I can request that money by simply. So when we have better and the better living environment, we can save more. It will lead to affordable interest rates. It will lead to easier.
Okay, I think Mr. Chidi is logged out. Please kindly just bear with us. I'm sure he's going to be coming back shortly. That's a network issue.
Now, I hope you've picked up one or two things. And if there are areas where we can interface or discuss, please feel free to make comments in the next phase. Thank you very much. God bless you.
All right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chidi. I want to say a very big thank you to you for the compelling presentation. Yes. And so we seem to have a whole lot to unpack. Angela, please Angela, confirm if you can hear me, because I know the network seems to be fluctuating. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes. Good. Yes. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chidi, once again. So we have a whole lot to unpack from the presentation that you have made. And again, before we begin to have our own discussion here, once again, we want as many, like we said when we started. I know I've seen one or two questions. If you have questions, do not hesitate to ask your question using the chat box. And again, we may be willing to take one or two persons. If you raise up your hand and you want to make comment or you want to make contribution, we may give you that privilege to make that comment and that contribution. Yeah, okay. So please don't hesitate to drop in your question. And again, if you have question I want to ask directly, you can raise up your hand and we're going to take your question. All right. So few talking points. Mr. Chidi had actually given us this presentation and made us realize all the issues that are related with the rent crisis in Nigeria. So I have 2 or 3 questions that I'm going to ask that we're going to use as our talking point. Mr. Chudi, you talked about population, you talked about inflation, you also did talk about the FX rate also, all this coming together as a means of having some sort of impact on the rent crisis. Now, I want to ask, how much of this, from your own experience and from your study of the market, how much of this is driven by inflation and FX pressure versus the structural undersupply of housing? When you started, you talked about the problem with the housing, and we also took us through the inflation and all that. But asking now, can you please a bit elaborate more? How much of this will you think that is being driven by inflation vis-a-vis the real undersupply of housing that we have in Nigeria? Hello?
Okay, thank you, Sanjo. Can you hear me?
It's very
the undersupply of housing. The undersupply of housing. The structural problem. The undersupply of housing is a function of the fact that there are not enough houses. Has made it more and more expensive for people to build houses. houses. Let me take that again. The undersupply of housing, the housing crisis that we face today, function of the fact that there are not enough houses into the market. The data that we have says that Nigeria should ordinarily produce about 700,000 units of housing every year. And we're just a detached house, luxury house, no, just the basic housing. One, two, and three bedroom flats. About 700,000 every year should be produced. We're not that figure. Really, we're not doing anything to build houses. It's expensive to acquire land. It's expensive. It's because of inflation. Inflation has driven up land values. Remember that land is a hedge. Land is real estate. And as real estate as it is, it's a hedge against inflation. People invest, and there are a lot of people whose sole investment, they just buy land. It's called land. So they buy land, land is expensive. And then you want to build. Building is expensive. Building materials are expensive. Labor is expensive. The services to go with the development of the unit of house is expensive. So this all add up to the point where people are not even very interested in building. And those who do build are building, if you look around you, they're doing it over 5 years, 6 years, or 6 months, or 2 weeks of the place. It's done over a 6 funding. So they are using their own internally generated funds, their profits from their businesses and so on, to do this development. We will continue to have a structural problem with housing unless some of these issues are. It's okay.
Okay. I mean, the audio, I can't seem to hear you towards the last part, but I think it's the network or so. Okay. All right. That's fine. So let's, okay. Mr. Chidi, are you, okay, I think he's back. Good. Now, you've talked about when you, good. Okay. Thank you very much again. So when you were taking us through the presentation, you talked about the reason why people are no longer motivated, with regards to, building houses or buying houses for investment purposes. For example, you have a tenant who pay a year rent, and for the next 3, 4, 5 years, the man has a problem with you, takes you to court, then there's no motivation. So to this end, what do you think with regards to the issue of rent control? Because you talked about also where people, the greed, we have the greed where people come and say, okay, the property here is 40,000. It automatically becomes a benchmark. The other place, somebody also wants to rent.
Let me take that.
Okay, sir.
Sorry, there's an echo here. So let me take that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, so let me take that. When said, you cannot control what you do not deliver. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that the government makes. You cannot control what you do not produce. So if you talk about controlling rent, you will only drive getting accommodation into the black market. So you get people, you would have a property, the government has put the rent at 10 naira, but the market value for that property is 20 or 30 naira. So when you go to take the property, the landlord will give you an official receipt for 10 naira, and then you will pay the 20 or 30 naira, which is the market rent, under the table, which will not be reflected. So at the end of the day, it will be counterproductive. It's not something that I would advocate any day. It does not work. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So let's just go to, we've had some questions here. Let's take the questions of the people who have. Again, if you have additional questions, you can put them in the chat box. Or if you want to ask directly, please do show by raising up your hand. I'll get them to promote you and allow you to ask a question directly. So Mr. Chudi, Mr. Dayo Ayeyemi is asking, of course, this is what are the effects of the ongoing Middle East crisis on the real estate sector? I mean on project delivery, facility management, and rent.
Okay, the first thing is that depending on where you're getting your building materials, a lot of people actually go to Dubai, go to the Middle East to get building materials to finish their property. It may become much more expensive. As it were now, shipping is actually a little more expensive. Shipping has become a little more expensive because of the ongoing war. So you're going to have increased costs to finish up most properties if materials are coming from outside the country. We're talking about the effects of the war. We can see now this morning, very simple. This morning, I had to pick up a plumber from my house, and he followed me all the way to Maryland. And I was like, why are you following me? He says, oh, price of transportation has gone up. The price of transportation has gone up because fuel prices have gone up. Fuel prices have gone up because the price of oil has gone up. The price of oil has gone up because of the war in Iran and the Middle East. Now, at the end of the day, how will this plumber recoup his transportation costs? It's me. It is the developer who he's working for that will eventually bear the brunt. When the developer pays him that money, how do you think the developer will recoup his money? He's going to take it off the rent. That money is going to go back to the rent for the end user. Or if it is one who will sell the property, it's going to go into the final price, into the final sale price of the property. So let's not deceive ourselves. The world is so interconnected that everything is linked up, and it's only a matter of time. What affects somebody, what affects tomorrow will come back to us in 2 days' time. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Please, from the back end, I can see hands raised. Please, can you bring him up at Raphael? I think Raphael. Please, can you just bring him up as panelist? I'm going to allow you to take your comments or questions, but allow me to ask this. Let's take the other questions that we have on our chat box. Whilst at the back end, they're trying to bring you up to ask your question. There is this question here. Let me take this question. Okay. Mr. Chris Nwabuoku is asking, he says, with respect to your recommendation, that is the way forward, to what extent do you think we can influence government policies in order to bring out these crucial outcomes?
There's simply to just keep talking about it. Influencing government policies in Nigeria is never an easy thing. It takes repetition. We must keep talking about it. And that's why when I started the issue of dead capital and the Ministry of Capital, dead capital and the Ministry of Capital and Hernando de Soto, it's something that one is passionate about. We must continue to talk about it. Every fora, every opportunity that we get, we must continue to talk about it. The issue of public-private or public-private sector participation, we must continue to talk about it and let them understand the benefits that are involved. Reducing costs. Government is not about making profit. It's something that we need to rehash many times in Nigeria. Government is not a commercial entity. Government is there to provide you and I the enabling environment to do our business. Then we can reciprocate by paying taxes and by being good citizens and by playing our role, by providing employment and doing every other thing that we need to do as respectable citizens and corporate organizations. But in most Nigerian governments, most of the states and so on, government is almost like a commercial enterprise. They think that they are there to make profit. No, that's not the case. That's not the case. And so we must just continue to rehash these things, keep repeating them, keep saying them at every forum that we have, keep sending in our opinions, either by way of opinion papers or position papers, and keep talking to as many people in government as we can. Hopefully, in one of those discussions, one of those topics, somebody will catch the bug and the change will come. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We still have some other questions here, about 3 of them. Let's quickly rush into those questions. Mr. Olashein Femi is saying, I want to really appreciate, yes, Chudi Boss for digging so deep into major factors that account for the steady increase of rent, leading to scarcity and unideal situation in the property market. Having said that, my question is this. In addition to the list of your recommendation, what about engaging the government concerned authority through advocacy by different professional bodies in the building industry, since most of these challenges are being tied to unfavorable policies of the government? You talked about that earlier on, but you still want to probably push this a bit further.
I think I have spoken so much about this government intervention and how we can change things and engaging them. Everybody engages them. I mean, the builders are engaging them. We've talked in terms of building, we've talked about having uniform building materials. In terms of that, the Nigerian Building and Road Research Institute has done a lot of research. How can we build with local raw materials? We don't need to keep importing everything that we need for building. What can we do with the local raw materials that we have? How can we build cheap houses? How does the average man who earns the 70 or 80,000 naira minimum wage, how does he pay, or how would he own a house? How do we get access to land, cheap infrastructured land for people to build on? So we've talked today, there's nothing else. There's no other way to do it other than to constantly keep harping on it, hashing on it, wherever the opportunity comes, in our forums, in our associations, at our conferences, and so on. We'll not just keep on it, and everybody should play their role in that regard. Thank you.
All right, so another question, this is from an anonymous attendee. Is saying, in the face of these challenges, especially where capital to invest is out of reach, how can new investor come into the market?
Okay. This thing about capital being out of reach and so on, I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial or probably a little bit unpalatable. Nigeria, as it is today, is a country that does not lack capital. And I say that with all due sense of responsibility. Nigeria, we might have expensive capital, but we don't lack capital. In terms of expensive capital, yes, we don't have the enabling environment provided by the government, the structures, the institutions to ensure that when I put my capital out there, I'm certain that it will come back. But when we talk about scarce capital, Nigeria doesn't have scarce capital. If we had a problem with scarcity of capital, a lot of the Ponzi schemes that we see around would not be existing. There's a lot of capital in Nigeria. The problem we have is the structure for investment. Capital will go to where it can be used, where it will be secure. Capital will always go to where it can exit. Capital, I'll tell you that again, capital will go to where it is secure, that's one, where it will be used, two, and where it will exit when the time comes. Three things. For a lot of us in Nigeria today, capital will also go to where, as much as possible, it is open, it's transparent. I can see end to end. That is from start to end. I can see it. Nigeria lacks a lot of investment, basic investment outlets. If you're not putting your money in real estate, you're putting your money in stocks, in shares or whatever. You're not doing that, then you're putting your money in a fixed deposit investment. By and large, that's why the Ponzi schemes flourish. I don't want to mention any names, but that's why the Ponzi schemes flourish. People start up these Ponzi schemes, pay crazy sums of money, and then suddenly you hear that they closed and they had 2, 3 billion, 5 billion of people's monies. And you're wondering, hey, I'm looking for 200 million to do a real estate development. How come this money is not coming to me? The capital is there, but the information or the structure for people to come into my real estate development is not there. So many times, even the developers who are looking for this capital are getting the monies from friends. And that's where this thing about off-plan, things like off-plan. Off-plan is capital. Off-plan is capital. If I buy off-plan, I have given you capital to do your development. So for me, and like I said, this is a personal opinion, it might be controversial and so on. Nigeria does not lack capital. Nigeria may have expensive capital. But the key thing is that the capital here, a lot of the investments are opaque. There's a point of entry. People cannot see what the investment is, what the capital is going to do in the investment. And then people cannot see a point of exit. Capital will not go to where it cannot see end to end and exit. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. As we begin to try to close out, but I can see that we still have so many questions, and we're going to take them as much as we can. There's this question that is coming from Jenny. Jenny is saying, thank you for this session. My question borders on rent control. I rented an apartment for 3.2 million for 2 years, also paid 2 years agency and legal. After 1 year and 2 months, the landlord wrote to me to notify me of a rent increase from 3.2 to 4.5. How do I react to this increment? The landlord's reason is that all other people are increasing rent. How do I react to this increment? As a tenant, can I resist this 40% increment? This is supposed to be our first renewal. So this is a question for you, sir.
Yeah, Jenny, this is what I do. This is where I make a living. So when I finish, I will send you a fee note. So you have to give me like a phone number. But let's be honest, your landlord has done well. The first thing is that it's his investment. He's giving you 1 year, giving you nearly 10 months notice of his intention to increase his rent. The first thing I would ask you to do is do a quick survey. What are rental values in your neighborhood? Are they close to what he's asking, or are they over and above what he's asking? And then I'll just tell you, go into negotiations with him. Go into negotiations with your landlord. He's asking for a 40% increase. Offer him 10%. Do a quick offer him 10%. Talk about it. You have 10 months to do this conversation, deal with it, and hopefully in between, both of you will find common ground. And one thing I should tell people about landlords and tenants, landlords are human beings. There must also be some kind of relationship when you live in a landlord's house or whatever. When is his birthday? Buy him a bottle of wine and go and give it to him. For Christmas, send him half a bag of rice or a turkey or something. It's all relationship management. There are landlords that when you create that kind of relationship, there'll be a lot more, what's the word? There'll probably be a lot, I don't want to use the word humane, but they'll probably be able to, the issues that create these problems with landlord and tenant will be very, very reduced. But trust me, if you have a good relationship with your landlord, you would have your problem is solved in terms of rental increases. Never adopt the attitude of my landlord and tenant will be cat and mouse or it's war between us. Create a good relationship with your landlord, and I tell you, you will enjoy your residence in his property. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Chidi. There's another question. We have over 5 questions. We'll try and take them. That's the essence why we're here. Obiagele Jeffo is saying, thank you for this presentation. She's asking, what is your advice on providing workforce housing solutions for employees at affordable rates?
Yeah, if the organization can afford it, why not? If an organization can afford it, it's the best thing. When you go to a place like China, you find out that they provide accommodation for their workforce. It might not be suitable accommodation, but because those guys walk like ants, I'm sorry to use that terminology, they walk like ants. They live, let me just put it this way. Those guys live to walk. They walk 8-10 hours every day, go back to their hostels, catch the rest, sleep, wake up in the morning, and repeat the process. 6 days. Most organizations there provide accommodation, and what it does is that it increases their productivity. So when we see a country like China and Japan and so on, Taiwan, leading the world in terms of manufacturing, there's a reason behind it. One of those reasons is the fact that they have provided accommodation for their workforce. So for organizations that can afford it, it's a simple, fantastic idea. Not the ones that we do in Nigeria, where you say you're providing accommodation for your workforce. So the MD lives in Victoria Island, the finance director lives in Ikoyi, and then the rest of the workforce, the office, because the MD and the finance director live in Ikoyi and Victoria Island, and the office headquarters is now in Victoria Island, and then the remaining 98% of the staff are coming from the mainland and going through hell every day to get to work. But if an organization can afford it, yes, it's a good thing. Thank you.
All right, so another follow-up question for you. I'm sorry, we have to take this again. I know we are stretching this ability, but again, it shows that there are lots of, this is really important for the people who are listening. And so there's a follow-up question to you from Jenny, who you just responded to, says we really want that relationship, but the caretaker happens to be the landlord's daughter, and she wouldn't budge to allow us speak with the landlord or even meet with him. This is a follow-up to what the advice you gave to Jenny with regards to the increase in the rent and your advice on creating that relationship with the landlord. This is a follow-up question, sir.
Jenny, create that relationship with your landlord's daughter, but trust me, believe me, I don't see why you cannot reach your landlord. Even your neighbors, somewhere, somebody in the neighborhood would know where your landlord lives, even if he lives outside the state. Somebody somewhere on that road, the street where you live, some past former tenant in the property, the other tenants in the property, the landlord is not an invisible being. He must live somewhere. He must live somewhere. What's his name? Ask around. You must just do a little detective work and find out where he is. And you don't need his daughter's permission to go and greet him. You don't.
Okay, so let's take this other question. There's this question from LA. A follow-up question also is asking, I don't know if he or she, but the name is simply LA. If the structure is the problem, then how can you encourage people in the diaspora to invest in real estate in Nigeria?
Transparency. If real estate in Nigeria is transparent, people will invest. I talked about off purchases. It's all about transparency and integrity and so on. That's all that real estate in Nigeria needs to attract funds and capital. Transparency, integrity, honesty on the path of the operators. That's all. It's not
all right. Okay, thank you, sir. So there's the questions. Let me take Mr. Michael Etan question. Two questions in one. He's asking, of course, I know you've touched on these questions. You've, in your discussion with other questions, you've mentioned things that related to this, but again, we can probably still indulge and answer this question. Mr. Michael Etan is saying, how effective are Nigerian housing policies and rent control laws in protecting tenants today? Then he's also asking, that's on one part, he's also asking, how can government and private developers collaborate to increase affordable housing supply? Did you get that, Mr. Chude?
I did. Rent control housing policies have not been very effective in Nigeria. It's as simple as that. That's why we're having this conversation this morning. There's a housing crisis. The number of housing is not enough for those who want it. The rents, you can't control what you don't have control over. Government can't control rent. Like I said, it will drive housing into the black market. And that's not what we want. It to be counterproductive. Now, the second question was, again, the other second question, what was it again?
Let me see. 1 minute. Okay, the other question was asking was, okay, how effective is housing policy? Okay, I think you've taken. Okay, the other one is private developers collaborate to increase affordable housing.
Developers collaborating with government to provide housing. For me, that would be a no-brainer. But you know, what is easy everywhere else is always so challenging here. What is easy everywhere else is so challenging. Even by the fact of the land use decree or the land use act, all land belongs to the government, all land belongs to the state governor. And this same state governor can decide today to do a real line from one place to another, to do a road project from one location to another. So you have to ask yourself, why are these things so difficult? But at the end of the day, I have come to realize that even the government does not understand the enormity of the housing crisis. That's why the superficial attention is being paid to it. I will take that again. I do not believe that the government understands the seriousness, the enormity of the housing crisis. Because if they did, there will be a lot more serious attention paid to it. Today, the attention paid to the housing crisis is very superficial, very, very superficial. And so if at any point in time, government and developers want to come together to impact housing, it's very simple. The government, they own the land, so they can give a developer, give him 2,000 acres, 20, 30 kilometers out of town. And then to ensure that when that development is finished, it is taken up, the same government will put in a rail track. And if they can't do it, they can do it by PPP, public-private sector participation. Put in a rail track to the center of town. Put in a road track to the center of town. Basically, new development, new towns. So you have 2,000 acres or something, and the developer goes in there and does 10 to 15 or 20,000 units. That's a project that he can do for the next 15 years. Every year, producing 1,000 units. It will provide accommodation, it will provide employment, it will provide a market, it will create a new town. The effect, the total effect, the global effect, the entire effect cannot be fully discussed. You have to now, that's why I say that you sometimes have to wonder whether the government themselves understand the enormity of the housing crisis. And in my view, as a practitioner, as a person who has talked about this thing so many times, I don't get the impression that they understand it. A lot is just lip service. They pay lip service to it. Thank you.
All right. So there's a question, not question, but again, somebody's also, Okoyemi is also referring to the situation that Jenny had. I mean, I think it's the same situation that Okoyemi also says. Sadly, that is our situation too. We only have access to the caretaker. We have tried several ways to reach the landlord, but the best we got within the neighborhood is that the building is willed to a granddaughter, and the mom is also late. The father, who is the adult alive, relates to the caretaker, and no one knows how to find. I mean, I would just answer that. I mean, you said that earlier, Mr. Chidi. Let them do a detective work. It's hard to do, but again, it's still sadly so. It's just, but again, I don't know if you want to say one or two things to this. It just resonates that these are issues that people are actually facing for Okoyemi to also have similar and most similar experience like Jenny.
It may not be one of solution. So you look for it. You just need to keep looking. You need to keep searching. What's his name? Ask around. Ask in your office. Ask in your school group. Ask in the landlord tenants association. If there's a landlord tenants or residents association on the street, ask about it. You just have to keep asking. It must be a continuous thing until you achieve your objective. Because again, you have an objective in mind. I'm sure that sooner or later that works.
So let's take this last question before we ask if you're closing remark. Ayuba Olayiwola is saying, thank you, Mr. Chudi, for the expository and enlightening session. He's saying to reduce the housing gap and make houses available and affordable, finance is very important. Then he's now asking, how can Nigeria's mortgage financing system be revitalized? Did you get that, sir?
Yes. I talk about, the mortgage system here. Today, we have mortgages. In case people don't know, we have mortgages. You can go to most banks in a mortgage, but I assure you that when you see the terms and conditions, it's almost impossible. But yeah, you still have a few people here and there, a few businessmen who can afford it, a few people in the oil and gas industry, the banking sectors, and so on. But the real mortgage is mortgage that maybe comes at sub 4 or 5% or even 3% per annum, and is given to you at maybe 30, 35, and you're paying it up to about 60, 65, the prime or the range, the gap of your working life. So it's almost as if every month that you pay something, it's like a rental. But again, it's like you're paying that rental to own the property. How can we revitalize, or how can it work in Nigeria better? We don't have savings in Nigeria. Mortgage is long term. Mortgage is long-term. Mortgage, an average mortgage is 20, 25, 30 years. There's no money in the bank. You take any of the commercial banks, they don't have money to give you money for 25 years. Because even you and I know that when we put fixed deposits in the bank, it's for 90 days, it's for 180 days, it's for 60 days. That's call money. They can't use my 60-day money or your 60, 120-day money to go and give somebody a facility for 35, 25 years as mortgage. So the first thing is that the entire system needs a rejig. Our entire system needs a rejig. We need to have the enabling environment that will encourage savings. An economic system that will encourage savings. It is only when we then have savings that we can build the float for giving mortgages. Then we talk about the federal mortgage finance and federal and so on and so forth. They're there. When you look at some of the data of those companies or those agencies of government, when you look at the data and look at what you have to do to access their mortgage, you smile because their conditions clearly point to the fact that they don't understand the business that they're into. The conditions precedent your drawdown are simply a pointer to the fact that they don't even understand the business that they're into, but it's not something that I can begin to rehash now. We don't have the time. So let me just put it simply. The government still has a lot of work to do in terms of mortgage financing. How they can do it, the first thing is just even the creation of the enabling environment. There's the Nigerian Mortgage Refinancing Company also there. They're all doing their bit, but it is not enough. For the number of Nigerians who need houses, who want to buy houses, who need to build houses, we should be doing 50 times, 100 times more than all these agencies are doing today put together. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chidi. So before you go, so this is, a direct question. This is 2026. In 5 years' time, looking 5 years ahead, I want to ask you directly, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the housing outlook, and why? And that will come with your closing remarks.
Very optimistic. Nigeria is a country that I believe strongly. You know, how do they say it? Nigeria is a country that I believe in very strongly. I believe in the potentials. I believe in the strength of this country to rise above its difficulties, its challenges. Every country always has those things. I'm very optimistic that 5 years from now, the housing market will be strong, the real estate market will be strong, the land banking market will be strong. I don't see anything today that will make me feel otherwise. This is the time. If you want to take a bet on it, go and pick up a small plot of land today and fence it and leave it and see what happens. See where you will be 5 years from now regarding that plot of land in terms of value. There's a press, with a population of 200 million. The pressure on housing, pressure on land, pressure on values will continue to go up. Only those who cash into it now will know the difference. And in terms of my closing remarks, I always say, look, if you don't have a real estate investment, get on the real estate ladder. If you can't do it alone, come together with a pool of friends. There are 5, 6 of you, put money together, invest in something, hold it for a few years and sell. Repeat it 2, 3 times, and then you'll have enough money to go out and do your own investments. And this is generally for us. For government, we must continue to harp on the issue of giving people title to their land. We must reduce the volume or the quantum of debt capital in Nigeria. If this, once we begin to give title and make it easy for people to get title to their properties, debt capital will reduce, there'll be a lot more capital for investment, and there'll be a lot more business. The ripple effect of this cannot be quantified, even for the economic opportunities that it will create in the country. And so my last take is we must continue to harp on the issue of titling. In Lagos is good with titling. In every state of the country, the governors must make titling of land in the state a priority. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you again. So on behalf of Real Estate Today and Ubosile and Co., I want to extend a sincere thank you to Mr. Chidi Ubosi for such a thoughtful and a frank conversation. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of dialogue that our industry needs today. To our attendees, thank you for joining us today and for your excellent questions. Thank you for your joining us today and for your excellent questions. If you want the recording of this presentation, you can ask for them. We're going to send it across to you. And we hope that this presentation has given you clarity. It has given you cause for action. And again, it will be a pleasure to have you next time. Stay blessed and look forward for the next edition of Real Estate Today. So I want to say a big thank you to you. And we say God bless you and have a fruitful day ahead. Once again, God bless you.